genel izleyici kitlesi için uygundur.
Saat Farkı'ndan merhabalar. Bölgesel ve küresel meselelere ilişkin farklı perspektiflere yer vermeye çalışıyoruz her hafta. Dünyayı Ekotürk ekranında buluşturuyoruz. Bu hafta Orta Doğu'yu, Körfez bölgesini bilhassa konuşacağız. Malum aslında 7 Ekim'den bu yana bölgede çok fazla değişiklik yaşanıyor ama en son Suriye'de 24 yıllık Esad rejimiyle birlikte 61 yıllık aslında Baas rejiminin çöküşüne şahitlik ettik. Dolayısıyla biraz aslında son gelişmelerle birlikte hem Trump'ın seçiminin bölge için neler getireceğini, hem son yaşananların bölgeye etkisinin neler olacağını, İsrail, İran bir taraftan, Gazze'de devam eden katliamlar, tüm bunların bölgeye etkilerini, yansımalarını konuşacağız. Çok kıymetli bir araştırmacı, bir akademisyen var Kuveyt'ten, Kuveyt Üniversitesi'nden. Doktor Bedirel Saif bizlerle olacak. Selamun Aleyküm, hi, ehlen ve sehlen, welcome to my show, Ustaz Bedir, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure being with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course, we have limited time and we have millions of topics to talk. I don't know how we are going to make this happen. But Professor Saif, let's start with the recent shocking developments in Syria, if you like. Not very long ago, actually, not very long time ago, only maybe a few weeks ago, Arab nations led by particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates had been working hard to bring Bashar al-Assad back into the fold. Remember, rolling out the red carpets and back in the Arab League after a very long time, assuming that he was there to last. But apparently they were all badly mistaken. The fall of Assad regime, let's start with this, will surely have huge implications for the region. Could you please tell us more about what were the calculations of the Arab nations, particularly, as I said, Saudi and UAE, and also the others, and what will be the mid-term and long-term implications for the region?
Well, first, let me acknowledge and honor the unjustly decimated, detained, and displaced in Palestine, in Syria, in many other parts of the Middle East, and I hope that we can reach justice and peace for all. The region has suffered for way too long, and there has to be a time in which we do eventually arrive at sustainable peace and security and prosperity for everyone in the region. Now, regarding what happened in Syria, and to reflect back on the very quick turnaround of events, there are many lessons to come out of it. But I think that one of the main lessons is that the intelligence apparatuses of all the regional countries have not been quick and effective in reaching how weak and fragile the Assad regime has been for the longest time. So I think, if anything, everyone needs to look inwards and to try to assess, which is really challenging because this region is very fluid. It keeps changing. The dynamics are always everlastingly changing. And that's why we need to always be alert, aware, and to always center the local voices. I think the Syrian people have spoken. We have to listen. They've been speaking for a while, as I continue saying. And I think this is a step in the right direction in which we would like to see them coming to terms with their own people, with their own system, and presenting something that's Syrian-led and born. I think where many of the Gulf states and other regional actors, including Turkey and Egypt and Jordan and others, were very concerned about the fragmentation of the Syrian state. And as you know, for the past decade, the Syrian state has been fragmented. I mean, we've been seeing different spheres of influence, different parties, so it's virtually divided. Plus, there has been a long-lasting, endemic, systemic, if you may, socio-economic and political decay. So the situation has always been bad for Syria. Now, many are watching very carefully with what's happening on the ground at the moment. The steps of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the quickness in which they were able to secure most of the lands has taken all parties by surprise, including those, some of its backers as well. I think where we need to go now is watch very carefully where they're headed with the region and the country. They have been sending a lot of interesting messages concerning the shift in their posture because, 10 years or 12 years ago when they attempted and they failed with the uprising, there was a different narrative.
Right.
It was more extremist, it was less moderate, and that language doesn't seem to be the case at this stage. So many people are concerned with this language. Is it genuine? Is it sincere? Will it continue? And I think everyone needs to engage. It's in everyone's interest in the region to hear out the various Syrian groups that are out there, to try to have an inclusive process that does not exclude anyone, and to try and reach a mechanism in which they learn from the mistakes of the region. And here I'm thinking of the unfortunate events that took place in Libya, the unfortunate events in Iraq, in Yemen. So it seems that with Syria coming towards the tail end of these series of unfortunate conflicts and events, that they can learn something out of it. So far, we've been seeing those elements coming to term. They seem to have learned the lessons from the others. I just hope that no more violence comes through. Transitions are very tricky. There should be an expectation of some sort of violence. And violence, Faiza, let me start with two very clear aspects. One, Israel
we will also talk about
is currently pushing on with its occupation.
Right.
Unprecedented. They're breaking over a 50-year-old armistice agreement since the 73 war. This is unfortunate. And as you know, there are sleeper cells of the Islamic State. So how will they also come to terms with this? So it is an alarming situation and a very delicate one.
Right, Professor, we will talk more about actually Israel, but speaking of the fall of the Assad regime, now there are a number of course, there are probably hundreds of analyses and still more to come, but the possibility now probably of a major change in the regional order and probably no longer dominated by Iran and its allies. Do you call it the end of the axis of resistance?
The axis of resistance is now in the ICU. It has not died yet, but it is in a very fragile state. They lost a very big ally in Assad. They were very proud of themselves in calling out a Shiite crescent. They can no longer state that. A, Syria is out of this picture completely. B, Hezbollah in Lebanon is in a very, very precarious and weak position. And now even it will be more weakened because remember the supply line for Hezbollah was through Syria.
Right.
So how will the Iranians be able to access that? Hamas is not in the best of conditions. We heard yesterday in the ceasefire discussions that they've even allowed for a concession to allow for Israeli presence in Gaza to move forward with the ceasefire. This is new. So that signals another weakness. I hope and wish that Iran listens very carefully to these developments, that Iran extends its hand to cooperate with all regional partners because we want everyone's security, and it's based on non-negotiable international norms of non-interference in other affairs and pushing for an economic development agenda. The Gulf states, and I know Turkey and others are willing to do that. But let's hope that they also reciprocate and move on with a different calculus in mind. On that note as well, I don't think it would be the best ingredient for prosperity if Iran is replaced with another hegemon in the country. I think Syria should be for Syrians, and they should be the first and foremost the ones that decide their fate and future moving forward.
Professor Saif, speaking of Israel, also, post October 7, tension between Israel, Iran, and Hezbollah, a lot has happened, and also this situation actually was kind of a dilemma for most of the Gulf states, as they don't want a very empowered, let's say, Iran, and on the other hand, they're also afraid of the continuity of this brutality of Israel, let's say, in Gaza and elsewhere, including Lebanon. So it was kind of a dilemma for many of the Gulf countries as well. And probably Israel's calculation was that escalating tensions will push the Gulf closer to its interest, but it didn't happen that way. On the contrary, actually, Saudi Arabia, we have seen Saudi Arabia and UAE, making a rapprochement with Iran after a very long time. So from here, where do you see the regional cooperation, in particular between Saudi, UAE, and Iran? Do you think they can also, you wrote a very important analysis on foreign affairs, the Saudi solution. There you also mentioned that if Saudi Arabia can forge working ties with both Iran and Israel, it can play a new and useful role in moderating tensions. Do you think, where do Gulf countries stay today? From here, we will also talk about Trump 2.0 and what will bring this. But please tell us more about the Gulf countries' also position towards Iran.
So let me start with the regional order. I think the Gulf states have a golden opportunity to reshape the regional order in a way that serves all parties in place. The Gulf persona has not been an expansionist one, like Iran or Israel. It has always been a balancer, and it has always looked internally to advance its national interests and its economic plans to move towards the future. We understand in the last decade, with the weaknesses of other centers of Arab power in the past, that the Gulf states have risen to the fore, and with that comes responsibility. Now, why does the Gulf states, and particularly Saudi Arabia, stand in a unique position? They're talking into both Iran and Israel. Various parties in the Gulf talk to Israel, various other ones talk to Iran. And I think we are the only ones in such a position that can carry some clout and weight. Now, the Iranian project has been one in which it was trying to advance its expansion at the expense of the countries that it was in. The sour state of countries that it has a heavy presence, whether it's in proxies or other impacts, has not been doing well. And I'm thinking Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, you name it. I mean, even others. With Israel, it's trying to change the regional order to its favor violently. And let me tell you, we do not feel comfortable in the Gulf that the Israelis are trying to do this, because having one superior country dictating its way through violence and blood is not the way to go. And that's where I think the Gulf states come in. They can balance between the Israelis and Iranians. We need to find a coexistence framework. I think the Israelis now are in a very euphoric stage. They would not have believed what they have done. And I think they're eyeing moving towards regime change in Iran. And I doubt that the Iranians are even aware that their survival is on the line, because all it takes is Trump, and we'll come to Trump in a bit,
Yes.
but all it takes is pushing with Trump to accept them to do this, even if he does not intervene. And 2024, Faiza brought us a very unique development. We've seen the first ever direct attacks between Iran and Israel.
Right. Yeah, right.
And through these direct attacks, we were able to see the amount of weakness that Iran is really in. And that has not boded well for Iran. So I really hope that Iran listens carefully to these signals. They have been reaching out to the Gulf states. We've had an informal foreign ministers meeting in Qatar with Iran collectively. This hasn't happened since 2007, 2008. They have been sending their foreign minister and other officials on visiting sprees around the region, and I think this is welcome. But we need to see more tangible outputs when it comes to the proxy file, when it comes to the nuclear file, and when it comes to the missiles file. We cannot segment or segregate these files as they have done before. And it's an invitation to the incoming US administration, which seems to be interested in speaking to the Iranians. There was that report that Elon Musk did meet with the Iranian ambassador in New York. So these discussions are happening. I truly hope that they do not fall into the same mistake that the Obama administration fell in by ignoring and sidestepping the Gulf states and going ahead and dealing with them directly. I think the Gulf states can play a very constructive role, especially with the Americans wanting to have a bigger role for the regional actors in advancing their own security, given their focus on the East.
Yes, Professor, I want to elaborate a little bit more on this because the incoming US administration, as you also mentioned, Trump is back, but the region is not the same as 5 years ago. We all know that, I mean, he will find a very much transformed Middle East and Gulf region in particular, very much different than the one he helped create actually during his first term. So Gulf security is not probably going to be achieved with maximum pressure on Iran. While during his first term, it was very much the desire of most of the Gulf states actually to for Trump, and indeed they lobbied a lot in the US to convince him to put more pressure on Iran, and indeed they achieved that as well. But this term will be different as a lot has changed as we spoke now. So do you expect the second term, Trump second term, will be very different as the conditions are very different, or it will be again depend on pressuring Iran and also Gulf states will change the course again? And what do you expect really from second Trump presidency this time?
Look, the Trump administration will be an interesting scene to watch because he's combining within his own staffing two contradictory tendencies. So he has people that believe in isolationism and in focusing inwards on America's stature without intervening. Yet he also has people in the administration that are very interventionist in demeanor or neoconservative even. And many are trying to look at both camps, but the one person to look at and focus in is Trump. I think Trump has a very personalized way of leadership, and he is the one who will call the shots at the end of the day. That needs to be kept in mind. And I think the Gulf states are well equipped in dealing with him because that transactional nature is something that they've been doing properly well with him and others in the past when they can, you know, in a very pragmatic manner, exchange benefits and ideas of that sort. Now, the Gulf, as you said, is different. And this is also a piece that I wrote with Chatham House. He pushed the Gulf into a more of a self-reliance mode when the Trump administration didn't come to the rescue when Iran attacked Saudi Arabia in 2019. And it blocked tons of oil production in a few seconds with its missiles. And he didn't find that this is something that the Americans need to go in for. And on the same token, he also pushed for the de-escalation that took place among the Gulf states, which was then sealed with Kuwaiti mediation and with the presence of Jared Kushner in Al-Ula summit in 2021. So the Gulf has been more cohesive. It even released this year its first ever vision for regional security, which is a great achievement.
Right.
The GCC summit communique that happened in Kuwait early in December reinforces this de-escalatory trend. They want to work with all parties and partners. They've opened up to other countries. So the mood is not a combative mood. And I don't think if being pushed, they will succumb to that pressure. So I truly hope that the sound of reason prevails and that we can work together with the Americans to tone down and end the genocidal impulses of Israel at the moment and to push towards a new coexistence framework. Faiza, this year has shattered all red lines. It has changed all rules of engagement. It has killed all deterrences. We need to reestablish new ones because this is not a comfortable spot for anyone's own development. You cannot focus on domestic development if your neighborhood is in fire. And that's what the neighborhood has been in the past year. So I truly hope that this becomes a priority. It seems that for the American administration, Russia and Ukraine is top of their list. So they'll probably go there first. But then we expect that we need to move along this line. And let me add another very important element, Faiza. no stability and security in the region will happen if the Palestinians are not given their true rights.
Right.
They need to be given self-determination. It is an issue of occupation, degradation, dehumanization. They deserve to be treated as equal humans, and this will never happen under the current Israeli system. They're being treated as not even second-class citizens. They're treated as non-existent,
Right.
and this
Yeah.
is not acceptable. The Saudis, along with the European Union and Norway, have co-sponsored a very bold initiative in New York last September during the UN General Assembly meetings, and it's called the Global Alliance to Implement the Two-State Solution. Much has been said about the two-state solution.
Right.
Some have declared it dead. Some have said that it's impractical. But this is something that we need to work on. We need to find a new way to revive it. And what they've been doing is very practical with time-bound and specific proposals. They launched it in September. They met in Riyadh in October. And they met in Brussels in November. And they're meeting in January in Oslo. After each meeting, every single state that has joined, and it's close to over 90 states so far, they present a proposal list of what they can do, whether towards pressuring Israel or towards developing Palestinian reconciliation and institutions. And I think now is the time to think of the Palestinian issue not as an Arab, not as an Islamic issue. It's a global issue that everyone needs to come in and work with, because what happened in the past year cannot be repeated again.
Yeah, and I think there is a growing sense of, and also sensibility towards this issue, because we have been talking previously, about, as you also very well know, normalization, very long-awaited normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And in fact, probably the incoming US administration, Trump, is likely to return, or he will be willing to return to the Abraham Accords, but under these circumstances, I don't think that, even though there will be maybe still some kind of pressure on the Saudi Arabia, under these circumstances, it's not very possible. What do you expect in that regard?
I agree that the Trump administration will most probably return to the Abraham Accords with some tweaks, but I also believe that the Saudis have made their red lines very clear in terms of having an established Palestinian state before moving forward. Because if you don't do that, you're going to get many October 7ths in the future. So it's not only to Arab and Palestinian security, it's also to Israeli security that this state is secured. And this is not where the Israeli authorities are, but that's where American leverage comes in. Biden was not willing to use that leverage with the Israelis. Trump comes in as a much stronger man. He claims to have the clout of American power. Let's see him use his leverage to push a deal.
Professor, of course, I very much hope, but on the other hand, from a realistic point, do you think the Gulf states, of course, obviously the Gulf states now, especially Gulf states, more than ever need to hold on to their own unity and manage their differences, and indeed they have done so, especially after the summit and in El Ula, as you also mentioned. To remain aligned will be possible in the second Trump presidency. I'm asking this because there are also some still, of course, obviously, disagreements over Hamas, over, as you mentioned, Hayat Tahrir Sham in Syria. Now there is a new government in Syria, and there will probably be some disagreements over Syria as well. So do you think, what are the, or let's put it that way, what are the risky elements or factors that might undermine this coherence or this unity, do you think? Is there any risk, especially for the second Trump presidency, for the region and for the Gulf region in particular?
This has been my message to the Gulf states, that they need to remain steadfast and nurture their unity further. They've done a great work in the last few years, and they need to move it forward. Look, no country, the GCC, the 6 states are not a monolith. They're not identical. They're bound to have differences. The issue is, how can we manage these differences and communicate with one another? I think what you hear in the media in terms of over the moon differences, major issues, is sometimes exaggerated. And people were taken by surprise, for example, when Prince Mohammed bin Salman visited the UAE and was greeted by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, I wasn't surprised. I mean, the lines of communication were never stopped, but many thought, oh, they're talking again. But when did they stop talking? The GCC works with these different files. I think we've come a long way since the rift with Qatar. We've learned a lot of our mistakes from all sides, and it's in our interest to keep closer together in these very changing and challenging times.
Do you have any, personally or academically, any concern other than hope?
My concern is the spiral of conflict in the region will continue in Palestine, Israel. And my other concern is, Faiza, and we didn't talk about these, the region is also surrounded by other frozen conflicts. Remember, Syria was considered a frozen conflict 10 days ago.
Yeah.
And now it's in a different place. Imagine what would be the outcome if the same thing happens in Libya, in Sudan, in Yemen. We really need to focus our efforts and to work together to proactively work on these files before they erupt again. And we need to do this right away. It's this urgent.
Well, thank you very much. Shukran jazilan, Dr. Bedir El Saif. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Evet, Kuveyt Üniversitesi'nden araştırmacı, akademisyen Dr. Bedir El Saif'i ağırladık. Suriye'de yaşanan gelişmeler başta olmak üzere aslında Orta Doğu'da ve bilhassa Körfez bölgesinde bundan sonra olası yansımaları, bölgesel gelişmelerin olası yansımalarını ve ikinci Trump başkanlığının bölgeye neler getirebileceğini konuştuk. Önümüzdeki hafta yine farklı bir konuyla, farklı bir konukla karşınızda olmak dileğiyle. Hoşça kalın.